All right. Welcome back with the Power Perception Podcast. It is your host, Lani Hoa. Today we are joined by the one and only Luisa, Mataele, Tupea. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
No, so for a lot of my athletes in my podcast, my usual first question is, when is the first time you got playing sports? But, you know, in the industry that you're in, we'll kind of go into your background as we get along here. What would you say was the first time that was like, kind of your rude awakening to get on your game, in a sense?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. I think, so one of my first jobs was working at in Denver at a TV station, and it was a sports TV station, and I think that first time when we went live, and it's like, oh my gosh, like, I'm like working in TV, like this is what I've been looking forward to my whole life. And so I think like that moment, like when we went live and the cameras went on and we're like literally on the TV, like our show, that was like, what am I doing? Like I'm really here, like I'm really getting paid to like actually work in TV for the first time. So I think that would be.
It's probably kind of a sense like whenever when the cameras went live, it's probably like, oh shoot, like your heart sank, like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm actually doing this. I'll probably kind of liken it to a feeling like when the kickoff goes and you're on the kickoff team for a football player and you're getting ready to go and all that adrenaline comes into like one final moment. That's awesome. So for those of you who don't know, Luisa is very, I would say, in terms of your career, not many people for our younger generation know who you are, but you've had the opportunity to work with a lot of people, especially with ESPN and things like that. I kind of want to just give you this opportunity to share a little bit of your background and what you do for a living, and the floor is yours.
All right. So I always wanted to work in TV. I grew up watching the news my whole life, like since I was elementary school. Like all of us, my parents, my kids, we would always watch. We would always watch the news every night, and I'm like an information like junkie. Like I love news, I love sports, I love business, just everything. Like I would just watch everything, and then we used to have a subscription to the newspaper, and I would read it like every single page of the newspaper. I read the obituaries. I just would read everything. Like I always had that passion, and one time I heard like you should find a job that you really enjoy doing because then you'll never work a day in your life. And I think I was like maybe 11, and I'm like, my favorite thing to do is watch the news. So I decided then, I decided then that I wanted to work in news. And I ended up majoring in broadcast journalism because that's the normal track back then when I was growing up, is that you get a degree in journalism and then you work in the news. And so when I went to BYU, I majored in broadcast journalism. They actually have one of the top programs in the country in broadcast journalism. And I started out my first semester reporting, I was in just regular news. And I covered like when the King of Dona came to Utah, I covered that story. But then also they had the Mark Hacking story. And it was a rough story. You know, he had killed his wife and covered it up. And it was really depressing. It was really hard for me. And I've always been a sports fan. I grew up watching sports. And I honestly didn't know that everyone else doesn't. Like, to me, that was just a normal part of life. Like, my brothers played football. I watched football. My mom watched football. My sisters watched football. Like, we followed college football religiously in my house, especially because my parents are both BYU Pro Bowl alumni. So I would go to the games, you know, I'm 7, 8 years old, like, running around like, oh, that's a penalty, you know, where's the flag? You know, I was like that kid. So someone was like, why don't you try doing sports, you know, the next semester at school? And I was like, I don't know if I know enough about sports. Like, I'm not like a statistics person with that. And so I tried it out. It was fall semester and, BYU football, and it was so fun. Like, I'm going to do my assignments. I'm on the sidelines. I'm interviewing players, in volleyball and track. I'm just interviewing all these different athletes and, covering the highlights from the the week with all different sports. And it was such a big contrast to me from, everything else, that I was like, this is so fun. Like, this is so fun for me. Like, I've always loved sports. I just had thought of it more as like a hobby, something I enjoyed doing. And then I was like, this is just really fun. Like, I could do this all day. And then I transitioned into sports. And that's kind of, and then I was like, yeah, I just want to work in sports TV. I went from regular, like, news TV to, like, sports TV. And then I just worked my way up. I started, when ESPN was in town, they did a football game. And what they do is they hire a lot of the college students to work the games just as, like, on the sidelines, running cable, just, not anything complicated, but, working that game. I overheard one of the guys in charge, I overheard him say on the phone to somebody, like, you'll never guess what I went to in Provo, Utah today. He's like, I went to L&L's, went barbecue. And I was like, this Bonnie guy is talking about L&L's in Provo, Utah. And I'm like, after he got off the phone, I said, how do you know what L&L's is? Like, this Bonnie guy, like, it just didn't seem like that's something that he would know. And he said, oh, for ESPN, we cover a lot of events in Hawaii. We cover, like, PGA, we cover the Pro Bowl, like, the company that him and his brother had started, the brother went to the University of Hawaii, and so they knew a lot about Hawaii sports, and they covered, they went there, and I said, I was finishing up my school at BYU, and I said, well, I want to work in sports, like, can I work for you, like, at the, golf or the Pro Bowl? And they said, you can come work for us, but we're not going to pay for your flight, we're not going to pay for your hotel, we're not going to pay for anything. We'll just pay you, to just do the same thing, like run the cable on the sideline. And I'm like, I don't care, like, I just want to do whatever, I wanted to get my foot in the door. And so, luckily, I had family there and stuff, and, obviously I lost, I wasn't making money, flying there and staying with family, renting a car and everything. So, but I looked at it as an opportunity, like, I always look at everything as opportunities, and from that I was able to meet more people, and every time I meet more people, then I would talk about work, like, hey, what do you have going on? Is there something else I can work? Like, I'll get myself anywhere. I'll do whatever it takes. Like, I just wanted a chance to work. And so little by little, I started meeting people, and they started hiring me for different events. I started working. I did the World Baseball Classic, like the first one they had in San Diego. I did the Pro Bowl, like, for the first year. I did the Mercedes Golf PGA Open, and I met all these people, and like I said, I knew that they weren't going to pay me, like, all this money and fly me all out in the beginning, but I knew that I wanted to work in sports, and this was, a place that I wanted to work, so I kind of just kept going down that path. I finished school, and I started looking for work in sports TV. We have an audition tape, and I mailed it out to, like, every TV station in the country that had an opening for a sports reporter. I mailed out a tape, like, I put together my tape, and I didn't get any calls back. Nobody called me back for a year. I graduated. I'm like, okay, this is the time, like, we're gonna move, we're gonna find a job, and then, and then I'll start my career. But I didn't get any calls back for a year. So during that time, I was trying to make use of my contacts. I had interned in Utah at Channel 2 on Talking Sports, and so I kind of knew a few people here and there, plus a lot of the kids that I went to school with, they were doing internships at different places at sports radio and whatnot. And so my cousin was going into the draft this year, Halote Ngata. And he, one thing I knew is that if you're looking at the news and they're showing a Polynesian person, they're usually not in a good light, right? When you see them on the news, it's because they've broken a law or they've done something, bad. And that's the only perception that people that don't know us, that's what they see. They just see these bad images on TV. And Halote, I approached him and I said, hey, he's much younger than me, mind you. There's a huge age gap, but being related, I kind of forced myself to say, like, hey, would you mind if I set up interviews with you with the local, stations, TV, radio, whatnot? And he was like, yeah, sure. So this is pre-draft, mind you. So I contacted all the TV stations, contacted the radio stations, and I'm like, hey, this guy is going into the draft who was a projected high draft pick. And I'm like, let's set up an interview for him, with you. And, all the TV stations want to cover him. He's a Utah kid, and they're like, yeah, we'll definitely take an interview with this guy. They knew he was going to be a big story on draft day. And so it was like an easy story for them to cover. And so, the draft, this is almost a year after I graduated, probably. And he gets drafted the first round. Well, the Baltimore media starts calling to Utah. There's some of them know people in Utah, and they're like, hey, we want to interview this guy. This is our first round draft pick. Who do we talk to? How can you set up an interview with Halote for us in that area? And they said, well, call this girl. This girl, Luisa, has been setting up his interviews in Utah, and call her and see, if you can set something up. So I got a call from Baltimore. I'm like, hey, it was a guy that used to work in Utah in sports, and he was working in Baltimore at the time. He said, yeah, I want to set up this interview, and I got it all set up for him. And I said, hey, by the way, I met you before. And he's like, what? And I'm like, didn't you used to work in Utah? And he said, yeah, I did. And one time, one of my TV, classes had gone to Channel 4 for like a tour of the TV station, and he was there working. And so he had, I told him, like, yeah, I met you. And he's like, oh, well, what are you doing now? I'm like, I'm trying to find a job. That's what I'm trying to do right now. And he's like, well, I kind of talked to him that I had been working for ESPN after I finished school, just doing all these different events. And I was coming out, I was going to be working the Major League Baseball All-Star game that year. And he's like, why don't you come out to my station? I'll introduce you to, all my bosses and see if we can't get you a job. And I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. Done. Like, I'm coming out there. So I went out there and I met with him and his bosses, and they're like, the fact that you're here and you flew yourself out here, we don't have any openings, but there's this new station opening in Denver. They're covering Utah, BYU, they're coming to Mountain West Conference. I'm like, I'm from Mountain West Conference. I am a BYU grad. And so they're like, yeah. So they pass along my information, and then I got hired to work at the TV station in Denver. But sorry, am I going on too long?
Oh.
I don't know if I'm veering off too much.
So at the end of the day, what I always stress to people is you're not on here to have essentially follow my criteria. You're telling your story, and so anything that pertains to your story, like I say, who better to tell it than you, right? And so I'll just I'll butt in here and there, but I'm not gonna like force you like, hey, stop, so we can move to the next question. It's just speak freely.
Okay.
At the end of the day, I just want you to tell your own story.
I'm almost done.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, you're good.
Okay, so at this time, so I start the job in Denver. It was my first job in TV. It's almost a year after I graduate. I'm working. I've been hired to work on Sunday Night Baseball, and I happen to be working a Yankees-Red Sox game, which is really big in baseball. And I was at Fenway Park when they called me, and I get this call. I'm at Fenway Park, like I think I'm like on the what do you call it? The diamond. I'm on the diamond. Like I don't know, setting up something. I'm not exactly sure what I was doing, but I get this call and they're like, hey, we got your resume, and we'd really like to offer you a job. And I'm like, that's awesome. I'll take it. Where is it? What is it? And they're like, it's in Denver. I'm like, okay, I'll move to Denver. They're like, can you start, this is Sunday. They're like, can you start on Wednesday? I'm like, oh, Wednesday? Like, I'm flying home on Monday. Like, my family, I have a husband, I have 2 kids at home, and I tell them, like, you know what, I'm not at home right now. I have to fly back to Utah, and then I have to pack all my stuff. Is there any way we could slide it to Monday, like the following Monday? Well, he says, we go on air on Monday, I'm sorry. We go on air on Monday. I'm like, I can't make it there by Wednesday. I just can't. I asked him to slide me to Friday. So this is Sunday, and I have to be in Denver by Friday. And they're like, yeah, that's fine, you can come on that Friday. So I fly home, I call my husband, I'm like, hey, I finally got this job offer we've been waiting for a year. And he's like, okay, let's do it. And I'm like, okay, let's do it. Like, fly home, pack up all my stuff. And then I still had 2 young kids at the time. And he's gonna, he's like, he still has 1 class to finish college. So he's gonna finish his class and take care of the kids. And at this time, we had moved into my parents'. They have an apartment, basement apartment. We moved into their home to to help with the kids so that I could find a job and go to work. And so he says, okay, so we move. I go to Denver, and then he calls me and he says, I just have that 1 class left to graduate. I'm like, yeah. And he says, but I found out that the class is only taught once a year. I'm like, okay. It's like, it's taught this semester, and the semester has already started. It's too late to register for this class.
Wow.
And he's like, what are we going to do? I'm like, he's like, if I leave to Denver and I don't finish my class, I don't know that I'll get my engineering degree. He's an engineer. And I'm like, that's rough. Like, that's really important. He's been going to school all this time for engineering, and, he really needs to finish that up. And we both are like, you know what? You have to stay. You have to stay in Denver. You have to finish your degree. Wait for the following year. And then he ends up taking classes, and he had so many credits that he double majors during the semesters that he's not finishing his 1 last class. He's double majoring in physics and finishes the following year. So I'm in Denver. I just fly back every weekend. I work, and during that fall, we were working Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So we're working a 4-day week. And then I would fly home Sunday morning, 6 a.m., fly home. I have a calling in my church, and I would teach my class in church every week. And then Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, I would fly back to Denver. So I did this for a year, almost a year. My husband finished his degree. And during this time when I'm in Denver, I'm using my vacation time to work the Super Bowl, to work the NBA Finals, to work the World Series, to work all these different events that I had by this time I had started meeting people, that working at ESPN. And, one thing that people really enjoy is they like to work with people that work hard, makes their job easier. And I want to be that person that they think of. We're like, oh, who should we hire? Oh, we should hire Luisa, because she works hard. She'll get the job done, and we won't have to worry about it as much. And so, gradually, people started referring to me, because the way that a lot of the events are done, we call them remote events, so like a game, the way that they're done is they're hired individually, like each game is hired individually, or each sport is hired one by one. So they would kind of start referring to me like, oh, who would, we're going to this city, we can't find anyone to work for us, who do you think? Like, call Luisa, she'll fly out, she'll go anywhere, she'll work anywhere. And that's how my name just started getting, I started building a reputation for myself at ESPN. So after my husband moves to Denver, he, instead of finding a job in Denver, he ends up getting an offer in Chicago. And, Denver was so great because we were doing everything. It's kind of a small station, but we're producing content, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so you get a lot of experience, Sometimes we're producing 4 or 5 shows in a day besides the games. We started adding more shows. Everyone kind of has a chance to do everything there. I started out as a production assistant. I started, going out into the field producing interviews, and then they start, getting us shows to produce. And so it really gave me a lot of experience, so that, in about 2 years later, when my husband was ready for his next job, that we moved to Chicago, and he made a decision. They said, do you want to transfer to our station in Chicago? But I had built up such a good list of people that would hire me at ESPN that I said, I'm going to try this freelance thing, and I'm going to try and, stay with ESPN. And so I just did that. So we moved to Chicago. My husband started working full time, and then I started just doing freelance. They hired me on Monday Night Football. I started working on Monday Night Football, and then so I would get the whole season, Monday Night Football. Then they started hiring me on the NBA Finals. So then every year they started hiring me on the NBA Finals. Then they hired me on Sunday Night Baseball. So that every week during baseball season I'm doing that. And then they're like, oh, can you work, you work the Super Bowl, can you work, All-Star, can you work, little by little, they started, I started getting more and more work, to the point where they're like, Luisa, would you consider moving to Connecticut? And it was a great, something that we looked at as a family, but it just wasn't right. My husband's career, my kids, for us, we're like, what we really like in Chicago, we're gonna stay in Chicago for now, and we're gonna just keep freelancing and just see, how it goes. And so that's what we did. We were in Chicago for many years, and then when there was a healthcare bill called, Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, was passed, ESPN was hiring a lot of freelancers like me, so a lot of us. So because we work over a certain amount of days a year, they're required to give us insurance. And one of the ways they figured out that they could give us insurance was to just hire us as employees. So that's what they said. Even though we didn't live in Connecticut, they're like, you are an official employee, and with that came, 401k and all the other, retirement, all those other benefits that come to like the regular employees is, so then I converted to become a full-time employee for ESPN because they were hiring me so much, throughout the year. And so everything was going great. And I had just kind of built myself up so that I was able to get hired on all these different events, and that's kind of where I am now. My husband got a job in Hawaii. We moved to Hawaii. I told ESPN, you know what, I'm so sorry. I am moving to Hawaii, and if you have to let go of me as an employee, like, I completely understand. Like, it seems crazy that, you're in Connecticut, everything's mostly on the mainland, and I'm moving to Hawaii. Like, it was tough to tell them that, and I was surprised because they're like, you know what, Luisa, we'll just keep you on. Like, we'll just keep you freelance. I'm not freelance, sorry. We'll keep you part-time. So instead of, the full-time, all the time getting hired for events, they said, we'll reduce you down to part-time worker. That way we can hire you, we can't hire you more than 75 days a year, which is like, hey, that's great. They were able to keep me on staff, and I've been able to do events for them here and there while I'm in Hawaii. So I have a great job. Like, I love my work. I love the people I work with, and it's been really fun.
Man, as a kid who's always looked up to that industry in terms of, covering sports, I remember when I was younger, I don't know what it was, but like people who covered sports and got to talk about sports, analysts and people who were like co-hosts on shows like that. I was like so fascinated with it ever since I was like, I want to say like 13, 14, and ever since then I've always been like a huge follower of like 20 to 30 different sports talk shows. And my parents would always think it was weird that the fact that I can sit there and listen to sports talk radio for like hours upon hours, and it's just really cool because there was a point in time where I told my parents, it's like, hey, so like what I want to be when I grow up is like an analyst for sports. Mm-hmm. And the first reaction I got from them was like, oh, why don't you like go be a doctor or go be a lawyer or go do something? And I remember like trying to go to school and trying to appease my parents, And for the longest time, like I'd go to school and I was like, man, this is like, it's like I would dread every single day going in and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And then fast forward, I think, so a cool part about my story was when I first had my daughter in February 15th, 2018, and we had my daughter. I remember I was working at the airport. I'm still working there currently, and I want to say for about, what was it? So 2 or 3 weeks, it was like the whole month leading up to when my daughter was born. I was telling my wife, like, hey, I know, like, your feet are swelling up. It's close to having the baby. You don't have much energy. You just stay home. Like, don't worry about anything. I'm just going to go to Delta and pick up as many hours as I can, and then I'll cover everything. And then she's like, oh, thank you so much. And so she stayed home that whole entire month. And I remember it was like the most I had ever worked in my life in terms of the amount of hours I was accumulating every week. And it got up to around like 200 to 300 hours I cranked out within almost like a month and a half. And I was literally like sleeping in the parking lot at the airport because by the time I would finish one shift, it would be like 1:30, 2 o'clock. If I were to get home around 2 or 3, then my shift would start at like 6:30 or 7. And I was just like, it would make no sense to go home, shower, take like 30, 45 minutes to wind down, and get back up and come to work. And so what I would do was so I'd sleep in the parking lot, get back up, and then if I had like 2 or 3 days, I had a friend of mine who lived close to the airport. So hey, I'm just gonna come and shower, and then I'm gonna go straight back to work. And so I did that for like a long period of time. My daughter was born. I finally got that week off. And I remember a few weeks later, after I worked all those hours, we're sitting there with my wife. We had my daughter back at the house, and I go to pay off all of our bills for my wife giving birth. And I remember looking into our bank account. We only had like $30, $45 to show for it. And I was just like, I literally worked the hardest I've ever worked in my whole life, and that's all I had to show for it. And so I remember it was like, it hit me really hard. I was like, if I'm going to be working this hard, to try to provide for my family. I think I really want to do something that's, fulfilling in a sense, something that I love to do. So fast forward a few months later, I ended up getting I worked a lot more hours, and I used that for people to cover my shifts in the summer. And so I tried to go do door-to-door sales. I hit up one of my friends. I was like, hey, what are you guys selling this year? I was like, in Chicago. I was like, awesome. I was like, I want to take a few trainings. I want to come out. I was like, so I go to Chicago, and we are selling in, where is it? In Indiana, Gary, Indiana, where Michael Jackson is from. Yeah, it's a rough place, right?
Yeah.
So I think that whole first week I was with somebody, I was shadowing them. After that first week, I was like, okay, cool, I think I'm ready to go. And so they dropped me off in my area, and I start knocking some doors, and then, just reminded me of my mission. And then I remember in one of the trainings, one of our managers had said, there's too many of you who don't want to work hard, because come 7 o'clock, 7:30, you guys are already calling us and say, hey, can you come pick me up? And so that thought came into my head, and I was like, okay, if that's the case, then I'm going to stay out here until I get a cell. Like, I'm not going to go home until I have one. And I remember it was 9:30 at night, and I went to knock on this lady's door, and she's like, it's dark out. When that light pole comes on, our streets, like, no one's usually in the streets unless you're up to no good. And I was like, so I pitched her, got in the door, she let me in, and I ended up getting my very first sale. And, I'm super excited, stoked, and then called my guys, my techs, to come set up their alarm system. I leave the house, and down the street there's a light pole, and I was calling my friend, or my car group, to come pick me up. I was like, hey, just got my first sale, come get me. It's like, okay, we'll be there in like 10, 15 minutes. So I'm waiting at this light pole, and I remember it was like a black, a really dark sedan, that was the color, and it pulled up on me. And I remember the car window began to come down, and although it was a small car, it was packed. It had like 6, 7 people in there. And as he goes to put his window down, he says, hey man, where you from? And I can tell by the way he said it, it was like really contentious in a way. He was kind of like trying to check me. And I don't know why, but like my heart just dropped into my stomach. And I was thinking, like, I gotta get out of here. So I picked up my iPad, my notebook, and I just run. And then I go to turn down an alleyway, and when I go to turn, I can feel like this huge gust of wind that had just come under my armpit, right? And so I hear like doom, doom, doom. And I was like, oh shoot, I'm getting shot at in Gary, Indiana. And maybe they had mistaken me for someone else, I didn't know. But so I'm running on adrenaline, going down this alleyway, and I go to jump, and it's like a 6-foot fence. And when I jump, I'm going to brace for it because I don't think I'm going to clear it. And my feet go all the way over and I almost trip. And I was like, oh shoot, I really am on adrenaline. I just cleared a 6-foot fence entirely. And so I run down this alleyway, and it's probably 3 or 4 blocks down. I finally turn into this small house that had this huge hedge out in front of it. And so I hide behind it. The hedge is like 7, 8 feet high. And on my phone, I call for an Uber to come pick me up. And I see the car that had shot at me from before, and they pass by. The Uber pulls up like 2 or 3 minutes after. I get in the car. It takes me onto the other side of the town. We stop at a gas station. I had told my car group to meet me there. Something had happened. I jump into the car at the gas station, and I tell everyone in my car group what had happened. Everyone's like, oh shoot, that's crazy. And everyone's kind of freaking out. And as we're getting ready to pull out, we look over, and there's a guy who's getting ready to get out of his vehicle, and he has a gun in his hand, and he's going to pull down his ski mask, right? And he's getting ready to rob the gas station that I just pulled into. And so as soon as he puts on his ski mask, his eyes light up because our whole car saw him. And I'm just like, oh shoot. And so I'm just hitting our driver. get out of here, let's go. And so we turn into oncoming traffic, and he whips out and finally gets to our lane. We drive 120 the whole entire way home, just because how scared we are. And I remember where we were staying was in Chicago, so that was like a 45-minute drive from where we were settling. We finally get to the place, and I'm just shaking, you know what I mean? And finally, I kind of calmed down. We had got food, and a lot of the managers came to talk to me, and are you okay? I was like, yeah, I think I'm fine, you know, it's just kind of scary, you know. And I called my wife that night and let her know what happened, and I could hear her, she's holding back her tears. And I was telling her, hey, don't worry about anything, I'm just gonna sleep on it, and if I'm okay tomorrow, then I'll go. But if I'm not in the morning, then I'll get on the next flight out. Excuse me. So that night, I went to sleep around 10:30, 11 o'clock, and I remember waking up in the middle of the night around 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and when I had woken up, it was really abrupt in the way I woke up, and I was hyperventilating, breathing super hard, and my whole body was just drenched in sweat. And I go to take the covers off, and I feel the chill of the AC from how wet I was, and I didn't know that was how I felt at the time. And then as I sit there and sit up in my bed, and I was just finally catching my breath, and I go to call my wife, and on the first ring, it didn't even ring, she had already picked up the phone. And then I was like, oh, and then I told her what happened. She's like, do you remember what was in your dream? And I was like, yeah, I relived the moment of being shot at. And it played on a loop over and over again. And then she's like, yeah, I think it's best for you to go home. And so I got on a flight, the 6 a.m. flight from Chicago direct back to Salt Lake City. And I remember for the longest time, I always felt I tried to be in some type of way ambitious in terms of, I know this is what I don't want to do, and then I felt like a failure when I came home, and I was like, man. And then my wife was like, you're trying to do all these things that equate to a lot of money, why don't you just do something you love? And it's like, what do you mean? It's like, I've never met anyone that's passionate about sports as you. I've seen you talk to people about sports, and 30, 45 minutes in, your love of sports is still going while they kind of go. And I was just like, oh, so what do you mean? It's like, I don't know, but whatever you do, that should be the focus of how you do it. So the pandemic hits in January, February, and then Delta says, oh, we're going to be putting a lot of you guys on leave. You're not furloughed, but you'll be on leave. And I was like, well, we have my wife's grandma staying at the house with us now, and if I were to catch COVID, that could be a huge risk for her. So I'm just going to take this leave, and then Delta had told us they'll approve us for unemployment on that time. So I was telling my wife that, man, I'm super bored. I don't know what to do with all this time on my hands. It's just all that talk about how you said you wanted to do, why don't you start this sports podcast thing that you said you were going to start 2 or 3 years ago when we first met? And I was like, I don't know. It's I'm kind of scared to put myself out there like that. And she said, it's well, if you don't do anything during all this time, then I don't want to hear you complain about I didn't have time to do this or do that. And then I was like, yeah, that's right. And so as soon as that happens, then I use that whole entire time I was off of work to finally get my podcast going. And so I just think it's really inspiring to think about, oftentimes within our culture, not only, I want to say everyone, but there are a lot of people who think, the way to success is A plus B equals C. But in reality, success is what you make it. And so maybe kind of go into how was it for you kind of going against the grain in terms of Polynesians in that industry, I guess, would be my question to you.
Yeah, well, I think for one thing, I grew up, my mom's a working mom. And I, like growing up, I never felt that I was missing anything from my mom or my dad. I mean, both of them worked a lot. We both had, 2 jobs each, and they worked a lot, but at the same time, I felt like they were always there for me. Like, we always had what we needed. And so for me, working, I was always going to work because I wanted to, because I found something that I loved, And a lot of people question that, I think, like in church and, in our culture, like, oh, why are you working? You gotta stay home with your kids. But I'm like, my mom worked, and that, like, I was okay with it, and it provided us a lot of opportunities. So I think, that stereotype, like, you can't, I get a lot of pushback still to this day of people like, oh, why did you work? Or I travel a lot, like I don't, because I travel a lot, I go to different events, then, I'm not home as much. But, I have a really supportive husband, and my kids spend a lot of time with a lot of different family members and with my parents, and we made this decision as a family, and for our family, with, like I said, because I have a supportive spouse, it worked for me. And then also in sports, I think women in sports is something that a lot of men have a hard time with, and they just feel like it's something that should just be men they want to see. And, I get that too, or I get, people make comments like, oh, girls only watch sports for the uniforms, or they don't care about who, I just get all of that, those comments, or some, it's funny because some men actually try and quiz me on stats as if like, oh, I know more about, who holds the record for the, how many rushing yards in a season, and I know like which team, won the 1969, whatever championship. So I get that too. Like I get, guys trying to prove like, well, because I know more than sports, I should be where you are. You know what I mean? Like things like that. Like I definitely get a lot of
pushback.
Pushback, yeah. Like I can't believe you're working in sports. I love sports. Guys tell me like, oh, I love that. Like. Right. But I'm working in sales, I'm like, hey, I found something that I enjoy. I'm not a statistics person. I'm not a stats person. I can't tell you, who holds what record for whatever team or how many home runs. Like, that's just not me. But I know that I give my all, and I know that one thing is that people respect hard work. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. But they respect people who come in and work and just, you'll notice that with athletes. You'll notice that with other people. And I've been able to gain, a good reputation at my work that if they hire me, then I'll get the job done. And I just can't worry about all these other people saying that I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing because I'm a woman. And it's good though, because I think I've been able to find other people, like-minded people that I work with, or like in the industry. There's some groups that I've, found. There's a group for like Asian Pacific Islanders that work in journalism. So, I joined that group. I joined a bunch of different professional groups where we support each other, because I don't necessarily know anyone in the industry, but I found basically allies, people who are trying to do what I do. Mm-hmm. And other women that work in sports, like I've joined a group of women who are all trying to make it in sports, and one of the sideline reporters for one of the major networks, she started a group for women in sports and called Galvanize, and she basically brings in women and mentors them and gives us opportunities to help each other, build a camaraderie. You know?
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm lucky that I found them, you know, and that's what a lot of people, they just need, you know, either they can handle it like the pressure on their own, or they, you know, you find outside sources that help you, that they know what you're going through, you know, they know what you deal with, and then they're supportive of you, and so, you know, that's really helped. And I mean, the number one thing I think is you have to have a supportive spouse. Like, you cannot do this. You cannot, like, go after something that everyone is telling you can't do if your spouse isn't supportive of you. Like, there's just no way. Because there's so many decisions you have to make. And that's, like, one thing my husband and I always decided is, like, we can't make decisions based on money. Because we're chasing money, not, like, the quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, it was hard. Like, when we first started out, I mean, we were just out of college, both of us. Making, like, entry-level journalists is so low. Like, a lot of people joke, like, you know, they'll be the starting reporters will have to get a second job because they can't support themselves on just the, you know, those salaries. But the reason why people do it is because this is what they want to do. You know what I mean? It's almost like we kind of pay our dues in a way. Like, we make those sacrifices early that pay off in the end. And so, because my husband supported me, and because we were broke for so many years, you know, with 2 kids and not getting any help, like financial help from anyone, you know, it paid off in the long run. But it's hard. You know, it's hard when you look at your bank account and it's so small, you know, like you were saying, and you're like, oh my gosh, am I really going to, you know, make this decision where I don't know when the next paycheck is coming, or, you know, like, there are risks that you take in hopes that doors open. And one thing that's been my experience is that it always will open. It's just like, it's a matter of believing in yourself, you know, and working, like grinding as hard as you can. And, you know, things just happen. Opportunities open up. And, you know, something that, you know, someone told somebody about you because somebody, and then, you know, just things happen in your life. And I've been really fortunate because I have a really supportive husband, and I, you know, work for a really great company that really values their employees, and that has been, you know, able to, you know, find people that have mentored me in this field.
And I kind of have a few things I want to hit. I remember when you're talking about, you know, pushback on women. I remember before I had my daughter, you know, I kind of had a very closed mindset in terms of women in sports, right? And then when she was born, I took it upon myself, you know, seeing Kobe Bryant, you know, how he was with his daughters. I took it upon myself as someone who's a huge fan of basketball to kind of learn the game through the WNBA. And so I began to watch WNBA games because I had a daughter born. And then I remember, I want to say it was like 2 or 3 years ago, Carrie Champion, Molly, Karam, and all of them did that little show that they got together, and it was pretty much like 5 or 6 girls in ESPN, and they're like, it's like going back at all the stereotypes of women in sports. And it was already after I had already made the change, you know, of my mindset, and I was just like, man, like, how dumb did I look at that time, you know, looking at it from that frame. And then I just always thought it was really cool for women who are in sports. It's kind of like an anomaly whenever, you know, women make it, because, you know, there are so many things that can derail you in terms of guys who are closed-minded like I was, or, you know what I mean? And so I always thought that was cool. And then once I heard that it was a Polynesian girl who had made it, then, like, hearing about your story from, like, Shoni Dalaka and them, and I was just like, man, that is so awesome. You know what I mean? And it kind of, like, gave me a sense of not only pride, but a sense of hope. Like, not only did she make it as a Polynesian, but she made it as a woman. And then, so, like, I don't know, I just want to say, like, a huge props to you for because for someone who's always looked up to the industry, I've always been like, man, that's something I wish I could do. You know what I mean? And here you are doing it. And then you talked about how supportive your husband was, right? And honestly, you know, in terms of my little podcast, although it's not like anything big or anything, but at the end of the day, I don't think I would have started this if it wasn't for my wife, right? And as straightforward and blunt as she always is, like she watches the episode and it's like, hey, you messed up here, or you should have did this better, you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, she was the one who kind of like, hey, like if you really want to do this, you know, I'll support you 100%, but these are the things I need from you. And so I've always been a huge advocate for supportive spouses, and having a supportive environment is usually the way you make it. You don't make it by yourself. Like there are other sacrifices by other people to kind of help you shine and get you to that point. I kind of want to use this to segue into, you talked about mentorship with that group, right? Who are some of your mentors as you were coming up into this industry that kind of helped you, you know, get ready for what you're about to take on?
So when I was in college, I needed to find an internship. Vice Bahama was here in town, and he, I don't know him personally, or didn't, and I'm like, he's coming to a fireside. Well, I'm going to go to that fireside, and I'm going to ask him for an internship in Philadelphia. And so I went to the fireside, and that's exactly what I did. Like, I waited in line, and then I went like, bye, you don't know me, but I'm at BYU, and I want to intern at your station, because he was a sports anchor in Philly. And he's like, oh, okay, you want it? Yeah, like, no problem. Here's my email. Here's my number. Send me an email. Like, we'll get you set up with an interview. I was like, sweet. Like, this is awesome. So I did, like, send him an email. And I, you know, everything that all the information that he gave me, I followed through. I'm like, okay, here's my, because the other thing is that, BYU is you can't just get internship credit for anywhere. Mm-hmm. Basically, the place of business has to be approved that they're actually helping you, because technically you can't work for free unless it's an internship, and then they have to provide insurance for you too as a student, you know. So there's a lot of paperwork that BYU had to have, because no one at BYU had interned at this TV station in Philadelphia. So I did all the paperwork. I had BYU approve that. I had the station send it in. I had Vi approve my internship. And mind you, I'm living in Utah at this time, and I'm like, I don't know, like I'm working full time. I'm going to school full time. My husband's working full time, but Vi's like, you know, we'll let you set, you know, what hours you can do. And so basically, I would just fly back and forth, and like I would take off a week of work, and I would just go there, and I'd go to the station every day at like 6 a.m. and I'd stay there until the end of the newscast at night, like 10:30, 11 p.m. And I just did that for like a whole week. So I get in, you know, like so many hours, and then I go home and I work for 3 weeks, and I was at school at the same time. You know, I was able to work around it, but Vi was very helpful in making it happen. I didn't know until I got to the station that there's hundreds of people that apply for internships at the station, because it's one of the top markets in the country. It's in TV markets number 4. And so, you know, everyone wants to intern there because it's very prestigious that you are interning with a big station in a big city. And so, luckily, Vi helped me, and he mentioned to me that there's so many people that approach him about internships, but no one actually really follows through. And so he's like, you actually followed through and like came, and you know, I got myself out there, and and sometimes when I couldn't find a place to stay, I got a job at a hotel when I was in college, so that I could go places and stay for like cheap. And so when I couldn't find a hotel to stay for my internship, I was like, yeah, you can stay with our family, you can drive our extra car. Like, he was very, very helpful in that way. And he's put his, he's made requests in my behalf in this industry for different positions, which I'm very grateful for. And he's just been, he's been really good. There's another woman at ESPN. I was working, just as a runner. That's the bottom. That's the job that, you literally get people coffee, empty garbage. I started out as that, and I was having a hard time making headway getting past that, because everyone's like, oh my gosh, Luisa's this great runner. She knows everywhere. She does everything. And, I had one of my mentors, Cindy, at my work, and she was one of the main, we call them operations producers, that she, kind of took me under her wing, and she's like, what do you want to do? I'm like, I want to work. I want to be traveled around, Like, I want everything covered. Like, I want to work and have, like, steady work, and I'm willing to do whatever, So she really took me under her wing. She trained me for, a season, a college football season, and then I was hired to be, like, her assistant during college football. And, there's all these people, and it's, nobody has to do this for you, right? I mean, they don't have to help you. But I'm appreciative, because there's a lot of doors that open because of what, these people have done for me, or my, other people who hired me have really helped me along the way. I've gone to them like, hey, I'm thinking about, this, just different career choices, and, they've really helped me make decisions, and it's been very beneficial.
One thing I've really noticed is for people who work hard, you said, the other people will respect you because how hard you work. I remember, so I'm a huge Kobe Bryant fan, and I've seen like all his documentaries, like all his interviews online, and I remember he did a recent interview before he passed away with the All of the Smoke podcast, and they were saying, it's like, hey Kobe, like, man, you got all this great advice from all these great people. Like, back in the 90s and early 2000s, like, it was so, like, combative in terms of player relationships. Why did people, like, why were they willing to actually give you all this advice? And then he said, it's like, well, so I woke up every day around 3 a.m., 4 a.m. to get ready for my day. I worked out and trained 3 or 4 times a day as well. They knew how hard I worked, right? And so for the most part, people don't owe you anything. But, if you ask, you never know, right? And so I think I have a lot of, I don't think this is just a problem with just Polynesians, but like with people in general, when they graduate from high school or from college and they get their degree and they have a lack of experience, they kind of feel like, oh, like, what do I do now? Type of feeling. And oftentimes they're like, well, I'm just gonna go and get a job. And now they have this degree, and sometimes it just lays on the wayside, right? What would you say to people who do have a degree looking for internships? Because it seems like you were willing to put yourself out there, right? And so I think that's a big part of like kids just being shy. It's like, oh man, I don't want to put myself out there. Like, what if they say no? Just being afraid of rejection. What would you say to kids who are at that point, I guess, in their lives?
Well, I mean, internships are, if you can, if you're in college and you're able to, I wish I would have done an internship every semester of college. I didn't know that you could do that, but you can. At least when I went to school, you could. So, because a lot of industries, not just TV, is about who you know, and it's not always, this is what I always tell people, it's not always what you know, sometimes it's who you know. And people can open doors for you because, like I said, they know your work ethic. And, you know, get internships if you're in college, like, definitely go get internships. Everyone is welcoming free help. That's essentially what it is. But it's such good experience because you are actually working in the field that you want to work in. When I was at Channel 2 doing my internship, because I worked during the week and had school, you know, Monday through Friday, and I worked full time as well, I could only intern on Saturday and Sunday. But it was good because there's a show, I'm not sure if it's still on now, but it's called Talking Sports. And it was 2 hours of show. And so there'd be me, there'd be a producer, 1 or 2 producers, like the anchor, and then maybe another 1 or 2 editors. And like the 6 of us, we would just like get the entire show, you know, like they would say, okay, you're assigned this highlight, this highlight, this highlight, this interview, this, you know what I mean? Like basically they have what's called a rundown, and they would just assign, everyone would just break up the show, and I would just come in, I'm like, okay, and I start like editing like highlights, and they're like, oh, you know, we need someone to update the scoreboard, you know. At this time, like I said, this was 15 years ago, so, you know, we had to manually update it, add stuff, you know, do everything. So when I interned, you know, I'm like cutting the highlights, I'm, you know, updating the scores, you know, that run along the bottom that we call the ticker, I don't know what it's called anymore, but, you know, running the teleprompter, you know, just everything that you do, like I was doing it and getting experience. I was seeing how they do everything. And so, you know, who's not going to take that for free? Like any business, they're like, yeah, we'll take your help. You know, some internships you don't get to do as much. I was lucky enough that I found one that they did. The other thing is to ask. So I moved to Hawaii, and Hawaii has remote sports. So I work still for ESPN, but not nearly as much as I used to. I work the U.S. Open every year, and then a few events sometimes they'll have me out. It's just very cost prohibitive for them to fly me out to work like a day or two. So they don't really do that. So they'll take me for a long event like the U.S. Open. So I'm in Hawaii. I'm like, hey, they produce all the football games, all the basketball games here. There's so much like sports. And I send in my resume. I call people. I'm like, I can't, like, you know, people call me back and like, well, you know, we don't know if we can hire you. You know, we don't know. There's all these people telling me no. And I'm here and I'm like, I've actually won a sports Emmy for the season that I worked on ABC college football with the College Game Day crew. Like, that season we won an Emmy. And I'm like sending out my resume to, you know, all the local stations. Like, I have experience. I've worked, you know, all these major events. Please hire me. Like, nobody is hiring me. Like, I don't know anyone at the stations. Nobody knows me, and I can't get my foot in the door. And so last year, I'm like, it's been several years. I ended up working in other TV and movies. So I found work in local TV shows. I worked on Magnum PI for a season. I worked on other movies that have come to town because it's very similar. The work that I did for ESPN is very similar. And I'm able to like network, and it's the same thing. Like my name's getting passed around, like, oh, hire Luisa, you know, she can do the work. And last year I'm like, nobody's hiring me for sports. Like, I miss it. I miss working, you know, football. I miss all this stuff. So I just would go to my son's football games that were covered on TV, and I just go to the TV truck. I'm like, hi, is anyone here? They're like, yeah, what are you doing here? I'm like, well, you know, I work in sports, and I really like to work for you. And they're like, okay, you know, it's very odd for someone to do this, but at the same time, like, I'm a pretty shy person. If you don't know me, I don't really talk to people. I have a good memory for faces, but nobody remembers me. So I always play the game like, I know that person. I'm like, oh, hi, yeah, I'm Luisa. And they're like, oh, yeah, I met you. I'm like, oh, yeah, I did meet you. Like, I'm super shy. Like, doing things like talking to people that I don't know, being in places that I shouldn't be, like a TV truck that I'm not working, it's not comfortable for me. And then calling up people like to hire me, it's not comfortable for me. But finally, last month, one of my bosses from Denver I haven't talked to him in months, but he has a missionary going out, and we were just talking about how my son's going on a mission, his son just left on a mission, and he's like, so what are you up to now? I'm like, you know what, I'm trying to find work in sports here, but instead I'm working on TV shows and movies. You know, I just worked on a Netflix movie last year, and he's like, well, do you want to work in sports? I'm like, yeah. Everyone's like, we don't know what to hire you as. Because I'm not a technical person, like, so I can't do technical stuff, which is most of what they do in Hawaii. They do they hire people from the technical side. And he's like, well, I know the head of the local sports, and I'll talk to him. And then, sure enough, a week later, the guy's like, hey, I got great, referral from a guy that he works with. My old boss in Denver is doing another job working with the head of sports in Hawaii. He's like, hey, I got your info. We can't pay you the same. I'm like, no, like, it's not about pay for me. Like, for me, so I didn't tell him this, but this is my feeling. If I'm able to get my foot in the door for whatever job it is, I'm able to work so that people know I'm serious. People know, like, hire this girl, she'll do the job, And he's telling me, like, he can't pay me what ESPN pays me. He can't, he's like, we can't really pay that much. I'm like, it's not about the money for me, dude. Like, I'm just trying to get my foot in the door. He's like, I don't know that we have anything. I'm like, I will do whatever. I started out from the bottom of the mainland. I came to Hawaii, started out back out on TV and the bottom, worked my way up. If I have to do that with you, then I'm going to do that. Like, I will do whatever job you have. And they're like, okay. So then he hired me for all, like, mind you, I've been in Hawaii now for 4 years. So then I just got hired now to do all of the UH football games that are on our local TV station. So as the COVID safety person. And this is obviously not TV production, but, I'm working the games, and that's all I need. I just need my foot in the door. And my husband has been a big, promoter. He's always encouraged me and pushed me and believed in me. And he's like, you got to talk to me. You've got to do something. Because sometimes I'd be like, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing here? And it's uncomfortable. That's the thing. It's easy to stay in your comfort zone and just hope that opportunities come to you. Mm-hmm. But in your comfort zone, it's not where you grow. It's when you branch out. And that's what I think to myself. Every time I do something that's uncomfortable, like talk to somebody that I don't want to talk to, that I don't know, I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, I can do this. Like, I have to, like, pump myself up mentally to, like, put myself out on a limb. Because it's like, you said it's like a mission, it's like rejection, But you have to be okay with being uncomfortable. And, like, that's my advice, is, like, that's what I'll say, like, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got, right? Mm-hmm. So, to me, I'm like, okay, what more can I do? I've done everything I thought I should do. What else? You know what I mean? And like I said, whether it's interaction with my boss, I feel like I said, when you start doing what you can, and as much as you can, like, doors just open. And talking with people that I worked last week on the Fresno State University of Hawaii football game, because we produced it from Hawaii for the local audience. But I talked with a lot of people, and they're like, if you want to work this station, let me know. I can put your resume in. Like, I'll talk to people. I was like, I've been putting in resumes for 4 years now. You guys haven't called me back. They're like, yeah, because you have to know somebody. I'm like, well, now I know somebody. Like, now a door has been opened. But you know what? It took 4 years. Well, that's the thing. I'm much older than you. And I went back to school when I was 30. So I didn't even start, you're like, oh, I've done all this stuff. Yeah, but I'm way older than you. Like, I can't look at myself and say, people of my age are doing all these things and compare myself to them as to where they are and where I should be. You just have to look at like what direction you're headed, right? Like I have to be headed down a direction where I think I'm praying that a door will open. And they always do. Not always in a day or a month or 3 years, like mine is 4 years. But things will happen if you get used to being uncomfortable.
Man, I don't know. Man, in a sense, I feel like, I don't know, like it's like a calling to me in a sense. I remember listening to one of Gary Vee's podcasts, and he was talking to, a lot of these kids who want to become Instagram famous, or they're trying to get into certain jobs and this and that, or like for startups, for people who are trying to find work. And what he was saying was, at the end of the day, like these people don't owe you anything. So what you have to do is find a way to get in and create value for these people. And once they see your work, and if you're good at what you do, then eventually they'll kind of put you on, right? But they won't put you on all the way. You have to work from probably the bottom and then get to a level where they finally respect you. And, kids were asking, it's like, wait, what do you mean? But like, because it's like, well, a lot of you guys, trying to build a following on Instagram or whatever, all you guys do is go and follow someone and you expect them to follow you back, right? And it's like these people have like 55 million followers and you have like 20. Like, why would they? How does that help them in any way? And so he brought up an example. It's like one of his friends was in animations and an animator. And he's like, well, for you, he's like, what I would do is go to a lot of these people who are well-renowned people and say, hey, this is what I do for a living. It's like, don't worry about anything. What I'm going to do for you is I'm going to shoot you, like 20 to 30 animations of what you do for work. And I'll do that for the next, 3 or 4 weeks. And I'll be sending you this every single week. You don't have to worry about anything. It's like, I'll shoot it here. If you want me to shoot it to your email, that's fine. Other than that, I'll keep sending you these and then let me know if you like my work. And then he said he reached back to his friend and he had done that for like 20 or 30 people and then finally got on at like a really huge like media firm and then finally got a huge job. But he was saying, he's like, his friend had done this over the time of like 4 or 5 years. And he got his first break at whenever. And oftentimes we can kind of think like, man, I'm 32, I'm 33, and I'm not starting or I'm not where I want to be. And, you can get pressure from your parents, you can get pressure from your friends. You can often compare yourself to others and be like, dang, I haven't really done anything of value in my life. And he's like, if you think about, and he was just putting it into perspective, if you think about the life expectancy of someone here in the U.S. with all the technology and medicine that we have, if you're living a pretty like average healthy life, let's say you live until you're 85, almost 90, it's like you're 27, it's like you're not even halfway there yet, and you're kind of complaining or scared about what you're gonna do. It's like, and then the people who are kind of telling you, hey, you need to get your life together, oftentimes they don't have their lives together as well. And so you got to put things into perspective of, it's like, I start where I start, I finish where I finish. And that should be the only thing that really matters in the end.
Yeah, I wanted to add, so when I started out at BYU, I had my last year of college left. And I left and I got married and I had kids. So when I finally went back to BYU, I was 30 years old. And I was in classes with 18, 19-year-old kids. And I couldn't look at it as like, oh my gosh, I'm so old. I was like, I need to just finish my degree. You know what I mean? Like, you can't look at it and also like not give yourself necessarily a timeline. Because your timeline is your timeline. It's not going to match with everyone else. And I think people put pressure on themselves because they feel like, oh, now I can't do it, and I'm whatever age I am, and now I can't start a new career. Instead of going after what they want. But like I said, like, I don't feel like I work. Honestly, when I go to work, like, it's not work to me. Like, I can't imagine doing something that I didn't enjoy every day for 20, 30, 40 years. Like, that's the payoff, It's like, if you look at it, you have to look at it with a long-term perspective that this is what you want to do. And that's why, internships or things like that, like, give you an idea. Am I okay doing this every day, all day? Like, is this really what I want to do? That's, I think you should go after what you want to do. You shouldn't, this is my opinion, you shouldn't do, like, the career that your parents had for you. Mm-hmm. Because, like, are you really happy, like, doing a job that whatever you're doing? I just feel like, that's the same, I try and counsel my kids, like, find something that you enjoy, that you like, and find something that you're passionate about, because when you're happy, then I'm happy, and I don't want you being in a situation where you dread every morning getting up because you need to go to work. So.
Well, thank you. I think you gave a lot of applicable advice to not only Polynesian kids, but I think kids in general, and especially with the workforce and how it is today, especially with all the problems with COVID. I think this is something that can actually hit home for not only like kids, but there are probably parents out there who have these same thoughts or things that they want to do and accomplish as well. And so, with that being said, I just want to thank you today and thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure having you today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay. Oh,